mean, in Kohli's case, I think it's a combination of getting old. Bradman was 40% better than the second best batter of his era. 40% better than the second best batter in his era. I mean, think about how good Sachin Tendulkar was. I don't remember a single time when Australia changed their entire strategy, right, as a cricket team, just for one player. I think in sports where we have counting stats, I'm not sure we have another player with that kind of numbers that Bradman had. I'm not a huge fan of Shubman Gill's strategy.
So, hello everyone. Today we have the Jarrod Kimber. He's a cricket journalist, a writer, and everything related to cricket. I've been watching him since 2 or 3 years, and many of you might be watching him since long. So this is Karthike from onRec, the official podcasting club of IIT Roorkee. So first of all, Jarrod, congratulations on your new book, The Art of Batting.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So let's start off with the quick introduction of what the book tries to address and what is the thing that it tries to answer about cricket.
Yeah, I suppose I started with the idea of was it possible to come up with a good list of the 50 greatest batters? I think Cricket Web had done one. Ted Dexter had talked about some great batters. I think Simon Hughes had written a book, but no one had kind of gone into it in depth. They just said, "Here's a bunch
Yeah.
of great batters," and even the Cricket Web one, which I actually think was a really good effort. Um, there's no real parameters for what greatness is, right? So people are just voting on
Yeah.
what they think is great, and you might have a bunch of people who are like, "I think pretty batters are great, ugly batters are terrible," and so
Yeah.
I listened to a podcast called Thinking Basketball Podcast, and they've done I think there might have originally been a book as well, but I came about 5 years later. They did a podcast on it, and in the podcast, that was really interesting. Is they were explaining not so much why a player should be here or there, but the overall skills that have them roughly in that range, right? And how you can make a case for them being as high as 28 and maybe as low as 45, right? Or even more in some cases. And just intellectually, I was like, I wonder if I can bring all that together because, I've been an analyst for teams. I've been a work a day cricket writer. I'm a historian in cricket. Like I've got very different, skill sets. And I was like, I think if I wrote about the 50 greatest batters, I could use all the skills that I have. Right. And then, I sold the idea to Bloomsbury and, big thank you to them for picking it up. And then they asked me for the first chapter. The first chapter I gave them was a bit wild. In fact, it is the first chapter of the book. So if you read the book, you'll see it. But and then afterwards they were like, "We're not as interested in the list anymore." And I was like, "Great, because neither am I. I really just want to talk to really good players and great players about batting and just see what comes of it and try and make it." So for me, it's less a book about the greatest batters of all time and more a book about just batting and how great batting is and how hard it is
Yeah.
and what you have to do in different eras to survive. And that's really what I wanted the book to be about in the end.
Yeah. So you've made the ranking about according to many parameters. You must have used many parameters according to that.
Yep.
So there is a parameter of skill. There is a parameter of how others are playing in that particular era. So how do you balance out those factors, the match factors that you keep talking about in your videos, as well as the kind of bowling that was happening, the pitch that was into play, the overall score that was made into that match. So what were those parameters that you used in your rankings?
So that basically, to start with, there is no one number that tells us how good someone is at batting.
Yeah.
So what you will hear from people is most people just look at batting averages, right? But if you started
Mm,
playing
yeah.
cricket in 2018 and you've been playing for 7 years and you're averaging 42, that's probably better than averaging 46 between in the 7 years from 2015 to 2007, right? And
Yeah.
it's not
Right.
always going to be the case, but more often than not, it is going to be the case just because the pitches now and the way that people lose wickets really matter.
Yeah.
So you can't just look at batting averages. You also have to look at how strong someone is away from home. You also have to look at how good they were against the best bowling attacks. You have to look at how highly rated they were by peers because they are the other people who know about batting, right? That are that are
Yeah.
reminding you of these people. How much they can change the game. So you might look at a player like Kevin Peterson, who doesn't have a high strike rate, um, but we know that when he needed to have the high strike rate, he could change the game much quicker than someone like Garrod Kirsten. right? Who probably played in much tougher conditions than Kevin Peterson. And maybe their all-round record is roughly the same. But Gary Kirsten very rarely changed a test match or a series. And if he did it, it took him a long time, whereas KP could do it in a session. So you look at things like that, you are looking at strike rate. You know, there are only a handful of players really have had a strike rate that is massively impactful. But that, you know, especially when I talked to a lot of captains and they just kept going on about the players that are toughest are the ones who score the quickest because it just, you have to catch up, right? Where you made your runs, as I said, which team was good when you went up against? Did that, maybe you made runs against Australia, but they never had their good bowling lineup, right? In any of those games. All these
Yeah,
things
true that.
are
True that.
what you're factoring in. So, and we compared all the best players in the world to the other best players. I'm not comparing them to just the average players that they might have played against. Um, uh, David Warner, I can't remember what his away record was, but let's say David Warner averaged like 35
Yeah.
or 34 away from home. If you're comparing that to Alan Border, who averages 51 away from home, right? Like you can argue that David Warner had bigger impact than Alan Border at times because of the way he scored and what he did at home. But you'd also have to be pretty realistic to be like, if you're picking a player, you would always pick Border first, right? And there's no argument there because you know the Border is going to be pretty much averaging 50 at home and away. And so it's just, there was probably, you know, we looked at the median. We looked at the median score when they came in. We looked at their median batting position. We factored in opening. We factored in batting at number 6, you know, because they're very different positions. And yeah, and then from all that, you start to pick little things on different players, right? One of my favorite things to do with opening batters is to look at what opening batters averaged in England, New Zealand, and South Africa. That gives you a pretty good idea of how they go against the moving ball, right? The same with playing spin in Asia, right? We have the ability now to look at people playing spin in Asia. We know that 60 to 70% of the balls you're going to face in Asia are going to be spin bowling. So it's not exact science with some of it because we don't have ball by ball data with all those older players, but it gives you a pretty good idea of who was good at this and who was good at that and how they went about it and who were the greatest players. And then you just kind of putting it all into a masher and you're trying to come up with, as I said, the number is the most subjective bit, right? The the
Yep.
tier that they're in usually, like, most of the players are clumped together with like 4 or 5 other players in their same tier. And I think you could more often than not say that the player at the back end of the tier could also be the player at the front end of that tier, right? Like I think you could make an argument. But then within that, we then had ranges. So if you have, I'm trying to think of a good range of a player. You might have Kevin Peterson. I think you could make a claim he could be the 40th best batter of all time. But you could also make a claim that he'd be the 60th best batter of all time, right? I would hear both of those arguments pretty clearly. I think you'd struggle to convince me he's in the best 40 of all time, and you'd certainly struggle to convince me that he wasn't in the best 60 of all time, right? And so
Right.
that's essentially what you're doing, and you're going line by line. And it's funny, like someone will get really angry with you and be like, "You've got this player here, but look what they did." And I'm like, "Okay, so what you've done is look at one stat for one player and the same stat for another player." We looked at 15 different metrics. We also looked at video footage of all the players through history that we could find video footage on. We also talked to the contemporary batters of their era where possible, or we read about the contemporary batters of their era where it's possible. So generally, when people are upset about one player, they've done like about 30% of the work on that one player that we've done. And usually it's like 5% of the work. And we did it for 85 players. And in fact, if you then count the women, it's
Yeah.
probably, we probably put, what would we have had on a short list on women? So about another 20. So it's probably like 105 players. So it was quite a full on
Wow.
thing. And weirdly enough, the book isn't really about the list. The book is really just about batting and who was good at it and how they were good at it and why it matters and why it was tough and all those sorts of things.
So there has been a general shift in how batting has been done in the last 2 or 3 years. We've seen baseball coming up. We've seen players of the likes of Jaiswal and Harry Brook, Zach Crowley just smashing it all over the place. But we've seen the likes of Kohli, Gill, and Labuschagne struggle in the last 2 or 3 years. What do you think is the reason? I mean, is it the better bowling? Is it the wobble ball? Or is it something that just is the psychological difference due to the limited over game?
Yeah, no, I think in Kohli's case, I think it's a combination of getting old. I think
Yeah.
when the wobble ball first came in, people probably bowled it at the stumps, and he's really good when the ball's at the stumps. He doesn't have any issues when the ball's at the
Hmm.
stumps, right? And then eventually everyone went, oh, because everyone was bowling the wobble ball at the stumps for a good couple of years. And then they realized that
Yeah.
with Kohli, you actually want to move it outside off stump. And once they moved it outside off stump, then with the normal deterioration of his game and the fact that at home, Indian wickets were as hard as they have ever been to bat on, I
Yeah.
think you have quite
For
a
them.
unique situation, really, all things considered. Sorry, excuse me. Quite a unique situation that happened with Virat Kohli. I think it's fascinating, actually. Who were the other two you said? Babar Azam, was it?
Gill and Labuschagne, and as well as Babar Azam. Yeah.
So I think Labuschagne and Babar Azam were two players who came into world cricket. I think Babar Azam struggled and he changed his technique for Test cricket and it worked perfectly. But the
Yeah.
change that he made actually ended up causing him more problems than he ever
Mhm.
would have had normally. And I think with Labuschagne, again, a bit
Yeah. I
like
saw the
Kohli,
video of your.
yeah. And then with Labuschagne, I think it's just a simple situation. Again, a bit like Kohli, people have worked out where to bowl to him, right? And they bowl very
Mhm.
full and a little bit wide outside off stump. Eventually, he has to try and score, and he quite often nicks off to those balls. Probably, he would probably be quite similar to say someone like Faf du Plessis has probably a similar kind of weakness within his batting. That sort of quite full outside off stump is a bit of an issue. And so what happens is that's not where you bowl to most people, right? When Marnus came in and he made all those
Mhm.
runs, people were bowling straight to him. He's really good when you bowl straight to him, right? And now what has happened is
Mhm.
people are bowling wider and fuller, which means he's batting more across the stump. So you can actually still bowl straight to him, but he's in a different position, right? And that's what happens. That's what the game is. That's what the book is about. Is you think you're ahead of the game, and the game works you out, and it's fascinating, and that's why Sachin Tendulkar is such a great player, right? Because his ability to play in different eras against different game plans on different pitches and still stay ahead of the game, right? That's the genius of Sachin Tendulkar, and that's why he's on a different level to someone like Ricky Ponting or Virat Kohli, who for their time in their peak periods were as good, if not better than Sachin, but they weren't as good all the way through. They didn't have that ability. And once they got older, both of those players, once they got older, weren't particularly that good at all. Like the only reason that Kohli's record looks worse than Ponting's is Ponting failed in a high batting era. So he was averaging, high 30s,
Mhm.
but it was high 30s in an era where 40 was par, right? And he was below
Yeah.
par in the same way that Kohli was below par. In fact, in some years he was more below par than Kohli was. But no one remembers that. But the truth is that that those kinds of players are great, and then when the world changes, they can't catch up. Whereas the very best of all time, Jack Hobbs, Donald Bradman, Sachin Tendulkar, Glenn Hutton, I suppose you could throw in there as well. Those kinds of players,
Yeah.
Steve Smith, they can actually keep evolving, and it's just different kinds of greatness, and that's one of the fascinating things from the book.
That brings me to the next question. You've put Don Bradman above Sachin Tendulkar in your list. I mean, that was pretty interesting for me. So, what was the reason for that? I mean, uh, bowling is supposedly easier in 40s and 30s era if you put away the body line series,
Okay, but
and a
when
bit
you said
difficult
bowling
in the
was easier,
1990s.
when you said bowling was easier, bowling is going to get better in every single era. So that would, if that was the case, Sachin still wouldn't be number one, and you pick the best batter from this era because bowling is getting faster and stronger. Spinners are spinning the ball more than they ever have before. So, do you think the best batter is batting right now in the history of the game?
No, my question exactly was
No,
why
but that
is
is your
Bradman above
question.
Sachin?
No. It's very important you think about what you just said. That is actually what you are
Yeah.
saying. Because you were saying that bowling was better when Sachin played. And so because of that, Sachin must be a better batter than Bradman, right? That's not how these things work. Because the best bowlers
Yeah.
alive ever are probably this thing. Because McGrath didn't have access to all of the analysis that the bowlers had. McGrath wasn't as fast as Rabada or
Oh,
Bumrah, right? So by that
yeah.
case, if you're handling Bumrah, that's harder than facing McGrath, which was harder than facing Marshall, right? So you're playing a very
Yeah.
dangerous game when you say that. But continue with your point.
Yeah.
Go.
That was just my question. That what was the main reason of you putting Bradman above Sachin Tendulkar? Because you just said that
Who is the second
he
best batter
got
in Brad?
through.
Yeah, who was the second best batter in Sachin's era?
You could throw in a Brian Lara or Rahul Dravid maybe,
Great.
or
How
Ricky
much better was
Ponting.
Sachin than Brian Lara or Rahul Dravid?
I don't know the longevity. Maybe I think
No,
Dravid
no,
played
just give me a
almost
number.
same as
Could be 1%, it could be 10%, it could be 5%. Give me a number that you think he was better than those other guys.
might be a 10%.
Great. I think that's a bit optimistic, but that's not completely away from a correct number. Bradman was 40% better than the second best batter of his era.
Right.
40% better than the second best batter in his era. 40%. Not than all batters, than the second best batter of his era. If bowling was back then, why wasn't everyone averaging 80, 85, 90, 95, 100, 105?
Yeah, I
Can
think
you
you
answer
answered a
that?
very popular question nowadays.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Can you?
think you answered a very popular question nowadays. Yeah.
Right. That's the thing. People will say, "Oh, well, Bradman went up against farmers." About well, by the way, Sachin faced Ed O'Brandis, who was a chicken farmer himself. Right. There were plenty of cricketers that Sachin
Mhm.
went up against who were amateur cricketers as well. But to say that he went up
Mhm.
against those level of cricketers, fine. Why didn't the greatest England players of all time average 65, 70,
Mhm.
75, 80, 85, 90? Right. Like George Headley is unquestionably a genius batter. Right. I talk about him in the book. Incredible batter. But George Headley averaged around 60. Herbert Sutcliffe, a genius. Wally Hammond, a genius. Jack Hobbs, a genius. They were all averaging 55, 60, right? He's still 40% better than those guys. What are we talking about
Yeah,
here?
yeah,
Like, and Bradman there's no period in his career when he's not by far and away the best batter in the world. That is not the case of Sachin Tendulkar, right? There are periods when there were plenty of arguments that Brian Lara was as good as him at various times, right? There was probably a period where Ricky Ponting was doing better than Sachin, right? Um, that's just not the case, right? It's funny.
yeah.
The top three is Hobbs, Sachin, and Bradman, right? Hobbs and Sachin are both great, and I both think they have claims to be the greatest test batter of all time, right? Honestly. If you read the full list, you'll see the explanations I have. I tried to make a case for both of them to be the best batter of all time. But Hobbs in the 1920s is not the best batter in his side all the time, right?
Yeah,
Unfor-
quite a Hammond, I think.
yeah, even before Hammond, Sutcliffe, his opening partner, and then Hammond, right? And that's
Yeah.
not to say that. And Hobbs is a freak. There are probably times, and I'd have to go back and check the numbers, but there are probably times when Dravid probably went past Sachin because Dravid's peak is one of the best peaks of all time. There are
Yeah.
probably times when Dravid had gone beyond him, and there are probably times when Sehwag was more important within a game, and Laxton probably played better
Mhm.
innings than him as well. There are people who played better innings than Bradman. There are people who were great in Bradman's team and around Bradman. There was never any question that Bradman wasn't the greatest player in his team or the greatest player in the world from his second test until his last test. There's no question,
Not the
right?
last test, I think. Yeah.
No, even right up until that's what I'm saying. From his second test until that last test. So for the 50 test matches in the
Yeah.
middle, right? He is
Yeah.
unquestionably the greatest batter in the world for 2 decades, right? Here's my favorite
Yeah.
thing about
True that.
Bradman
I'll agree
is
to that.
he has an eye problem in the army, right? We don't know how bad it was, but we know his eyesight
Mhm.
wasn't perfect. And he comes out after World War II when he's almost 40 with bad eyes and he averages more than 100, right?
Mhm. I think he
And
averaged 50 odd in the Bodyline series. I think that was
yeah,
also great.
so the worst series he has is Bodyline. He has two black marks against him, and they're not really black marks. One is Bodyline, and I really do think that if people had bowled quick and short to him more often, you could have brought his average down to about 85, which is still great. But
Mm.
I actually think Bradman, all things considered, was probably at his very best against spin and proper spin. Because when we think of spin now, we think of Asia, but back in those days, the English wickets spun a lot more, and the Australian wickets and South African. Not that he played in South Africa, but South African wickets spun a lot more. So you have to readjust your brain. He played brilliantly against spin and against top spin bowlers, but I think he was probably at his best against the moving ball, and I think he might have been the best batter ever against seam bowling, swing bowling, and against spin bowling. Probably in the top two for spin bowling. I'd have him just behind Gavaskar on that, and then against very, very quick, short, fast bowling, I think he probably had a bit of a weakness, but he was still good enough to average 50 in body line when he was basically that. I mean, think about how good Sachin Tendulkar was. I don't remember a single time when Australia changed their entire strategy, right, as a cricket team just for one player. And I don't know if I've ever seen that really. Maybe India did it briefly for McGrath. Maybe teams did it sometimes for Murali or Hadley. I don't think I've ever seen a team change their entire strategy based around one batter, right? He averaged, if we say 50 is a great average, he averaged that twice. There's just no argument,
Yeah.
really. And it's a shame because I would have loved for it to be Hobbs or Tendulkar because I probably prefer them more as human beings and, other things that they did within cricket.
Mhm.
But Bradman is unlike anything we've ever seen before. I think if you rattled off like the top 15 or so high-end skills that any batter has ever had, he probably had almost all of them, right? And that's the difference between him and some of the other greatest batters of all time, right? They don't have all of them, right? They don't have the ability. Like Bradman could score really fast, right? And yet he did
Yeah.
it without taking any chances at all these different things that he could do that normal batters just couldn't do. He was an absolute freak of nature. And if you want to say he wasn't challenged in as many places as Sachin, I think that's really, really fair, right? If you want to say that by the time he started playing, the pitches were getting better than when Hobbs played, again, I think that's really, really fair. There are periods in their careers when I think Sachin is probably underrated in the 90s as a player. And probably overrated in the 2000s, not because it's his fault, but because he's already a great player and everyone's making runs in the 2000s.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
but you look at Bradman's records, and he made so many runs that he warps the entire eras that he plays in because
Yeah.
no one could get him out, mate. Right? And the
Mhm.
other greatest batters of all time have just not had that ability.
Yeah, I think there was an instance at the Ashes at Old Trafford when I think Crawley made 189. Commentators were referencing Don Bradman. You're in 2023, you are referring to a 1940s batter. So I think that pretty much defines the greatness of the guy. And yeah, he's been discussed 80 years after his prime. So yeah,
Yeah. I mean, just to go back, as I was saying before, like when I was writing the book, it was really annoying because everyone knows who's going to be number one, right? So I'm not that I'm a contrarian, but I was like, no, I'm going to do this properly. I'm not just going to say Bradman's number one. What I'm going to do is work
yeah,
out all the players I think who have a argument to be number one, right? And then I'm going to see if I can make the argument for Sachin or Jack Hobbs. And I didn't know which one, right? But I'm going to make the argument to see which one of them should be number one. And I just couldn't do it. It's just, he just made so many runs. And as I said,
Mhm.
to be 40% better than the best player, the second best player of your era is phenomenal. But he was also basically 100% better than a par player in his era, right? For two
Yeah,
decades,
true that.
100% better than a par
Yeah.
player. It's mind blowing, dude, when you look at those numbers. Like people, sometimes someone will say to me, "Oh, Wilt Chamberlain was like the Don Bradman of cricket." I was like, Wilt Chamberlain had a couple of good years, right, where he put up ridiculous numbers, and eventually Wilt Chamberlain realized that his numbers weren't even helping his team win, and he changed his game. Nothing but respect for Wilt Chamberlain for doing that, by the way. But Wilt Chamberlain averaged 50 in the NBA 1 year. To beat Bradman, he would have had to score 50 in the NBA pretty much every year, right? That's what he would have had to
Mhm.
have done. And you've got some great squash legends, and the squash legend, and we've had some great snooker legends. We probably have other players in different sports who have had similar kind of records to Bradman, but not in sports where we have counting stats. I think in sports where we have counting stats, I'm not sure we have another player with that kind of numbers that Bradman had.
So I think this is the biggest sporting achievement, the average of 99.94, and to be able to be consistent for this long from Don Bradman.
So Tim Wigmore's got a book out, and you should contact him and try and get him on your podcast as well. And in that book, he said that we both agreed that Sachin's peak is in the 90s. That's when Sachin's at his absolute best. India barely win a test match, right? When
Yeah, true
Bradman was,
that.
yeah, have a look at the numbers. It's fascinating, especially away from home. They really struggle as a team away from home. Not as bad at home, obviously, but away from home, really, really struggle.
Mhm.
And he's the second best batter of all time. The reason that England played bodyline is because you couldn't beat Australia with Bradman in the side, right?
True.
He's probably the only batter in the history of the game where that's been the case, right? He's so good as a batter. He's like a great bowling attack on his own. And so
Mhm.
I'm less interested in the statistics and more interested in the fact that he actually warped our game because most teams, I'm trying to think, let me give you some examples of this. So most teams who have like a great player, who have one great bowler, still win test matches. So Fazal Mahmood for Pakistan, Richard Hadley for New Zealand, Murali for Sri Lanka, right? Those players are really, really good at winning games for their teams, despite the fact that sometimes their team isn't that good, right? They're all bowlers, right? It's so rare
True.
for a batter to do that. And I'm not saying Bradman didn't have a great side because he did, but he didn't always have a great side. It wasn't like they were automatic. If you take Bradman out, England probably would have beat them fairly consistently. With Bradman in, what there's not much you could do. And I think that's the impact that he had as a batter. I don't think we've ever seen another batter like that. So I'm less interested in the 99.94, and I'm more interested in the fact that he basically did what great bowlers quite often do, which is he could win games on his own, and it just wasn't something that other people were doing.
Yeah, so I think we are short of time a bit. So I think we can move on to the next segment about what is currently happening in cricket. So we have
Sure.
India touring England in a few days time. So what do you think is going to happen in England with India? I think they're bringing in a very inexperienced side with Gill as the captain. So what is your prediction for the series? How is it going to pan out?
Yeah, I originally had India as favourites when Mohammad Shami was going to play and was fit and available. And then since then, obviously, with Shami's injury, I just think that brings it back because England don't have a great bowling attack. They're trying some other players at the moment. They had Josh Chung is fine. I like Bryden Cast, but if Jofra isn't fit and Chris Wokes can't play, like Bumrah and Shami is quite clearly the best two bowlers in that series before you get to an English bowler, right?
Yeah.
Without Shami, that changes quite a bit, right? On top of the fact
Yeah.
that Gill's going to be nervous, he might over bowl him and everything else. So yeah, I do think it will change quite dramatically because of that. But even without that, you're going to lose a lot of experience losing Gill and Rohit. But I think you could argue in the last year you'll probably make more runs from those positions than you would have before. So you get an upgrade there. But it's having a captain who is. I, I'm not a huge fan of Shubman Gill's strategy, not bowling Saika Shaw out all this year. Lots of times I've been like, I just think they're making the wrong decisions, using Prashi Krishna in the wrong overs. Um, just making simple mistakes over and over again. Not terrible ones. I don't think he's a bad captain, but I don't think he's a plus captain at the moment. And so England can be a tough place to tour, right? It can get on top of you. It's not quite Australia, and it's different than South Africa, but there are elements where it's a tough place to tour, and also you've got the whole baseball thing, and it's a different style of cricket that's going up against you. I was lucky enough for my book to talk to Rahul Dravid, and they were like, India was positive, right, that they were going to win the series against England, and that the baseball wouldn't work. And then Ollie Pope comes out and plays that innings, and they're all sitting there going, "We can't keep doing this. Look, this isn't going to last." And it just keeps going and going to the point at where they're like, "What if we're wrong?
Oh,
What if he can do this?" Right? That is when you had Rahul Dravid, Virat Kohli, Ashwin, Rohit Sharma, all in your leadership group. Now, your leadership
yeah,
group
true
isn't
that.
that, right? So what happens when you panic? That's the thing we don't know, I think, at the moment. If I was to say, and I'm not even saying it's bad. I just don't know. I don't know what that is going to be. Ben Duckett is going to make runs in one innings and they're going to come fast. Zach Crawley is going to hit a 70 off 50 balls at one stage, right? Harry Brook is going to get loose. Bryden Cars is going to reverse swing a couple of balls. They're going to bowl bounces for a whole day because they can, right? Like that. This is what this team does. If that's the case, we don't know because we don't know this team well enough, and no one can answer that at the moment. We just be absolutely guessing.
So one interesting thing that I thought about after watching the England versus Zimbabwe match, I think England made absolute belters. Zimbabwe opener comes up and makes him run a ball 100 at England. I think it's not a joke. So is
Mm.
England keep doing it in this series as well, or are they going to test India with swing? I think this is their good chance because Indian batting is not that experienced, in my opinion.
Yeah, but is England bowling experienced?
No, I mean, if they make flat pitches, I think they'd be more playing into the hands of India, in my opinion.
Well, the Indian batting level is higher than the English batting level, though. So you could argue the opposite. The truth is, it's not going to matter. And I can tell you why it's not going to matter is the wickets are going to be what they're going to be this year because there's been no rain in this country. Uh, Generally, you get moisture. You can take moisture out of a wicket and you can make it a little bit more flat. It's very hard to add moisture into a wicket. And I've been playing a lot of cricket recently in the UK, and I have bad knees, so I have like a built-in system of telling how bad a pitch is, how hard a ground is, because I have no cartilage, so my knees bang into each other. I'm really struggling to play cricket in England this year because the grounds are so hard and they are so dry. I don't think they have a choice. That's just how the wickets are going to be, man. I just think that's where it's going to be. Have a look at some of the scores from Edgbaston. Have a look at some of the scores from Old Trafford. That isn't normal. They're just flat wickets everywhere. So I think they will be flat wickets. I think that's also England players don't have great techniques. I take obviously Root out of that. Who's the second? Who's got that second best technique? Maybe Jamie Smith, right? Ollie Pope.
Ollie Pope, you could argue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they they they're fine techniques, but I wouldn't say Ollie Pope is a great technician, right? So flat wickets kind of help them because they're a little bit more like ODI cricket. But I just don't think there's a choice. I could be wrong, and they might try and put a little bit of extra grass on. But I don't think you're going to get traditional English wickets this summer unless something changes between now and then. Um, my backyard is just rock hard, and like I'm not that far from the Oval. And so London's been like that. Edgbaston or Birmingham's been like that. Manchester's been like that. I haven't done much touring around the rest of the country, but I would assume it's been pretty dry everywhere. So just guessing on all this, man, I think the wickets are going to be pretty flat. I think spin is going to play a much bigger role than anyone in India is assuming, just because look at Secunda Raza bowled, what, 24 overs on day one at Trent Bridge?
Mhm.
I know they had an injury, but that's not a normal thing to have happen, is it?
I mean, it quite scared me a bit seeing Zimbabwe score a 350 because I do support England in an India versus England match. It really was scary seeing Zimbabwe do so well, almost getting close to 300, and their opener making an absolute bonker innings of 100 runs.
And they're not a good
So,
batting
I
lineup.
mean,
That's not a good batting lineup. Like you look at that batting lineup, you've got a T10 player, right? Make the 100. You've got a couple of older guys who are good but limited. And then the batting basically finishes at number five. And they're been a bowling team, Zimbabwe, and they look pretty good batting at times. They probably should have made 350 in both innings, if we're being honest. Like a slightly better side makes 450 to 500 pretty easily, I think, in one of those innings, right? Um, they've got no one. Their number six is a prospect. Their number seven is not an international level batter by any stretch of the imagination. And their number eight is not much better than you or me, right? Like it gets pretty bad the higher up you go in the order there. So yeah,
all right. So I think I'll be moving a bit more forward. In a few months' time, England going to Australia. I think it's going to be huge. I think when baseball started up, it had two questions. The Indian question, how is it going to fare in India? How is it going to fare in Australia? I think the Indian one, they pretty badly failed. But do you think it's going to be better this time around in Australia for England?
it's fascinating because Australian. right at the moment, Australian pitches are better for swing and seam bowling than England pitches are. Now, obviously, this dry spell in England will go away and the moisture will come back and that will change. But right at the moment, if you're a swing and a seam bowler, you'd rather bowl in Australia than you would in England, which is a wild thing to think, right? But the best ball batting is the interesting one because it's really hard to score in Australian pitches now, right? As you saw with the Indian series, like it's so hard to score, and their techniques are so poor. A lot of the England players that you would just assume that it's going to go against them. But Cummins, Stark, and Hazelwood keep getting injured, keep getting nibbles, can't go all the way through. England played Scott Boland really well last time in England, where he should have been unplayable. Um, who are the backup bowlers? Jai Richardson is probably the best backup bowler. He can't stay fit. I don't think they've quite made a decision on Spencer Johnson. They've got, someone like Fergus O'Neill, who the English team will probably not be that worried about. He's playing really good in county cricket, but I don't think they'll be worried about him. So, and there's an aging batting like Usman Khawaja was out of form for ages. Who is Australia's opening partner with him? Is Cameron Green, actually, where does he come in? Where does he bat? Is Mitch Marsh finally done? Like, there's lots of questions with the Australian team, right? And so it's a fascinating era if you think probably the top four teams. Yeah, I would say the top four teams all have strengths and all have weaknesses, right? You've got that tier below of probably what New Zealand on their own, and then you've got the sort of Sri Lanka, Zimbabwe, Bangladesh, West Indies, who all have bowlers who can win games, right? But are not consistent teams by any stretch of the imagination. And I don't even know where you would put Pakistan in all that because they're so random as well. So you've really got it's a weird time for Test cricket at the moment. There isn't really a team where you're just like, that's a great team. I trust them. Tristan Stubbs is batting at 3 for South Africa, basically because they ran out of options, right? Like they were just like, let's just try the guy who's really good and see if he can make it work, right? Sam Constas, like Australia's just like, I don't know, let's see what he does. Like it's Jacob Bethel, right? Yeah, I mean, who's India's third best seamer anymore, right? They don't know.
Well, there are all sorts of questions before an Ashes series for an Australian side when it's happening in Australia, but then a 4-0 or 5-0 happens and then all questions fade away and Australia are a good side again and they come in form somehow.
Yeah, I mean, look, Australia. I think if Shami was fit in that last series, I think I originally picked Australia to win 3-2. And then they lost the first test. And you can imagine every comment on my YouTube page was like, and I was like, I'm not changing. I think it's still 3-2. Shami never got fit, and I was like, it's probably 4-1, right? But I was still factoring in that I assumed Shami would play in the last three tests because he was bowling in List A cricket by that stage. But obviously, he wasn't good enough to bowl in the test. But like Australia should win that series. At the moment, you would probably say if everything goes right for Australia, it should be 4-1. How much does an injury to Stark or Cummins or Hazelwood change that conversation, though? Hazelwood's the one they can cover because of Boland, but Hazelwood's actually the best test bowler out of the three of them at the moment. So you don't really want him to go. So yeah, it could be interesting. Jofra is the other wild one because if Jofra is fully fit and feeling really confident and takes some wickets in the Indian against India, and even plays Test cricket, he should be really good in Australia, right? Like, so he can change things. Bryden Cass could be a good backup bowler in Australia, like Castle Tongue. That's some options, but they're not a better team than Australia at the moment. That might be different by the time the Ashes comes around.
So there's a rapid fire section.
Okay,
So first
give it to me.
question, tomorrow's IPL. Tomorrow's the IPL final. Who's taking this? And by what
Uh,
margin you think?
it's fit. I looked at the odds. I talked to Rob Barron. We both basically agree that RCB is probably slightly better than Punjab, but not anything that's worth saying this team will win. It's like 52-48. What is interesting is if the final was being played tomorrow, Mumbai were in it, they would be favourites, even though they're probably not as good as either of these sides right at the moment. Yeah, so I think RCB is slightly better, but there's not much between them, mate.
So RCB is your prediction.
If it's 52 to 48, right? If I asked you to predict a coin being tossed, that's what you're asking me to do. I have no firm belief that one side is massively better than the other.
All right. So who's taking the WTC final this time around? Is it Australia or South Africa?
It should be Australia.
Maybe better in the English conditions or a better
I
batting
just think
lineup,
they're a,
I
I
think.
just think they're a better team all round. I think South Africa have done really well to make the final. Um, as long as everyone is fit for Australia and is available, I just think they're a much more experienced, much more talented team than South Africa is. Um, that. So going back to the conversation a minute ago, in the IPL final, it's 52 to 48. In that World Test Championship final, it's probably 66 to 33. Right? I think Australia is clearly the better team when it comes to the World Test Champion to Test cricket. But that still means that 1 out of 3 times South Africa could win the game. I don't think South Africa has no hope. I just think Australia is the better team of the two.
Do you think they were lucky to get into the finals, the South Africans, having slightly easier matches?
Yeah, but that's how these things work, man. I mean, it's that's um,
Mm.
there's nothing within that that's particularly surprising. Like that's a fairly normal thing that happens all the time. You can do that. India have had good lineups at times and everything else. So yeah, that's for me that doesn't make it. I wouldn't even worry about stuff like that. That's just once you're in the final, you're in the final. You had to win a lot of test matches and they won them.
All right. So scoreline prediction for the India versus England series.
Um, 3-2 England.
Right. So India's taking 2 matches. All right.
Yeah, I could do that.
So yes,
As I
we
said,
already
it's a dry summer. I mean, India could still win. I don't think there's much between these two teams.
Hmm. So who's taking? All right. You already predicted the Ashes scoreline 4-1. You still on to that? I mean, that's your prediction, final prediction.
Yeah, as I said, as long as everyone's fit, based on what I know at the moment.
Hmm.
I mean, if England had a blinding summer against India, uh, and Australia has injuries, then England could do better. But at the moment, I don't see anything within England cricket that is going to blow Australia away.
So the next question is: Jarrod going to break Sachin's record of 15,000 Test runs?
No.
All right.
If
Could
you
you
ask me
elaborate
tomorrow, I
onto
might
that?
say yes. But if you're asking me today, I'll say no. I think I think age is undefeated, man. And he's got to play for a long time, and a lot of things are going to happen to him in his life. I know he loves cricket, but I don't think he loves batting as much as, say, Steve Smith does or Sachin did. And I think when he gets to 36, 37, 38, he might want to spend more time playing golf. He might want to, I know he loves investing and doing businesses and stuff. What we talked about at the start of the thing, other things come into your life at that point, right? And it's things change a little bit. So yeah, I think there's every chance he won't break it. If he just keeps batting for 5 years, he could, but he needs to be really good for a long time to be able to do it. The good news for him is it's not like England are producing a lot of great batters, so he shouldn't be dropped.
Yeah, true that. Okay, so last question. I think this is an obvious one, but do you see playing till the 27 World Cup?
I think that's the plan. It's a bit like the Joe Root one. I think Joe Root's plan is to try and break the world record, win as many Test matches as possible for England. And Virat desperately wanted to win the World Test Championship. Realizes that he can't win that and has decided to retire from that. Fine. I think him and Rohit want to go out with the 50 over World Cup. I think that's the plan as it currently is there. Obviously, Virat wants to win an IPL, which he might very soon, and so that also helps. But I think he wants to win. I think he wants to win the 50 over World Cup twice. I think he wants to go out at the start of his career and the end of his career with that. He grew up. Got to remember for these guys, they didn't grow up as T20 fans, right? They grew up as
Yeah.
Test cricket fans and 50 over, right? So this means more to him than it will to some of the fans, right? It really does, especially to the younger fans who are like, 50 over cricket. What? It's not the IPL, right? And I think it really does matter to those guys. I think it specifically matters to him. But what did I just say with Joe Root? Age is undefeated, right? One of the reasons that Sachin Tendulkar and Bradman are so great is their ability to start very young and finish very old. Their bodies allowed them to. I do a podcast with Robbie O'Tupper, and he's like, "Oh, Jarrod, you don't understand. Sachin had broken toes, whatever." And I'm like, "Yeah, no, I get that, but his eyes didn't go, right? His back didn't go. He could still move. I'm not saying he didn't play through pain in a way that maybe other players wouldn't have. But what I am saying is there is a certain level of which you are eventually you just can't get past it and you can't do anything. And so I certainly think that that was an element of that.
So I think I've ran out of questions, and that brings to the conclusion of the podcast. I think it was a wonderful conversation with you, Jarrod. It was a stuff of dreams for me.
Thank you very much. Please, to all your followers, if you're interested in batting or you have someone in your life who is interested in batting, I think The Art of Batting is a great book. For fans who just love batting, right? Whether it's an actual great book or not, that's for other people to decide. But this book was written for people who love batting and want to know as much as possible about it. So please go out and do it. And thank you very much for having me on the show.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming, Jarrod, and thanks a lot.
No
This has been a
worries.
great conversation.